my dad had the first hand-wound phonograph and the first radio in our community up near Waynesboro, Virginia, about 8 miles southeast of Waynesboro. Mm-hmm. And from it, I remember vividly listening to that and just being infatuated by the story-type songs. And I just played them over and over, and people would gather in on Saturday nights. At that time, all the radio was Clear Channel. They had barn dances on Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Jacksonville, Florida, and a number of other places. And you could pick them up, just one play out in the time zone and another would come on, So that's how it was. My mom had gone to music school. Stamps Baxter used to come through the different communities and teach a couple of weeks classes in reading the shape notes because they was wanting to sell their sheet music in their songbooks and stuff, you see. And she took that so she could read the shape notes very profusely and played the organ in church. We had no pump organ at home, and she was pleased that I liked the music. My dad loved it, but he never tried to participate in it, like sing bass in church, or thought he did. But as I grew older, I got my first guitar, I think, when I was about 13. It was a $3.95 job from Sears Roebuck. Came in a cardboard box. And there was nobody in the community that could tune the darn thing. I had all kind of instruction books, and my mom tried to help me. But finally, an old gentleman came through and held a revival at our local church. And it was customary back then that still you'd get in the room at a hotel or something. You didn't have any transportation. He'd stay with the people who attended his services, And he came and stayed overnight with us and saw my old guitar, and he tuned it up for me. And it had a neck in it like a wagon tongue. Before he was out of sight, I think it was out of tune again. But it was a start anyhow. But then in high school, I did my first broadcast when I was 13 or 14. They had a good group. It was 2 years ahead of me in high school called the Hungry Five. And they had great instruments, guitars and banjos, and not banjos, but fiddles and bass and stuff like that. But none of them sang. Right. So that's where, when I became a freshman, they needed a singer, so that's where I fit in with them, you see. The music business wasn't the most profitable business to be in back at that time. The radio, it was a barter system, so to speak. The radio stations didn't pay the entertainers any money, but they gave them free airtime, and they could build up an audience and go out and play schools and theaters and Grange halls and venues of that type. And then the radio stations would sell the airtime to the local car dealers or tire companies or grocery stores or whatever, But a lot of the old boys were just nomads, so to speak. They'd come in and didn't have an income, so they'd run up some bills, and first, they'd slip out in the middle of the night, So I really never entertained the idea of being in it professionally. In fact, I took courses in high school, bookkeeping, shorthand, typing, to be a CEO. Not a CEO, but a CPA. I'll get my letters right here. But Merck and Company, a big pharmaceutical outfit, was near Grottoes, Virginia. And a lot of my friends and relatives worked there. It was the place to work. And I had my application in there. And as soon as I graduated, I went down to try to hire in, and they turned me down on the physical. I had polio when I was a kid. Well, man, the world just fell apart. I could have walked under the proverbial snake with the top hat on. I was really low. Yeah. And it was during the war. I worked a few weeks with a fellow on the local Harrisonburg station, but if we could get gas and tires to get to the theaters and such, people couldn't get to come see us, see. So I saw that wasn't going to fly. And I went to work in a manganese mine as an assistant chemist and was working all summer and enjoyed it very much. It was out, a lot of it was out in the field. And then one afternoon, along in late fall, a fellow came by and wanted to give me a ride home. And on the way, he said he had been authorized to match money with me if I wanted to go to college. So I jumped at that and went to the Shenandoah Conservatory of Music in Dayton, Virginia. And the class was taught by the local radio station program director. Dick Johnson was his name. And it was 12, 13 miles from Dayton into Harrisonburg, where they were a daytime station. So we'd go in there a lot of times and have our radio course classes right in the studio, reading commercials and riding the gain on the boards and such as that. So I did that for several years. He offered me a full-time job. He had a guy inducted into the service, and he had just a skeleton crew, so he offered me a full-time job, and that's what I was going to college for, so I jumped at that. And did that for several years, and I was working a lot of hours, not making a whole lot of money, but I was enjoying it and learning a lot, and gave me a chance to go in and talk to the manager and the program director, because I knew just enough. I didn't know how much I didn't know. And I got to looking around, and the program director and the managers were driving Fords and Chevrolets, and the hillbillies were driving Cadillacs. So I gave that a little thought. It seemed like it was kind of one-sided, So I went up to Frederick, Maryland with my first little band, and it was good in the summertime because every little town had a fireman's carnival or something like that as a fundraiser, and they didn't care whether we was good or not, but they wanted that radio advertising for their festivities, you see. But along in the fall, man, when the weather got bad, boy, you had to pack a lunch to get downtown. I ain't kidding you. It was terrible. So I went back to Harrisonburg and worked with Lee Moore till his contract ran out. And then in the fall of 46, I went to work with Molly O'Day at Knoxville, Tennessee, and enjoyed that very much. Thought I was hitting the big time there, And at that time, there were no studios in Nashville, if you can believe that. She got a contract with Columbia, and we had to drive to Chicago to record. I played bass on the first 16 sides that she recorded for Columbia. Because she played guitar, and her husband played guitar, Lynn Davis. And I was kind of like an opening act. So I knew they wouldn't want a third guitar on those sessions, so I talked them into using the bass, told them that would become customary. Uncle Art Satherley produced that session, incidentally. He was a big a big fellow in the music business. Recorded Bob Wills and people of that stature. And the rest of it just, Lynn kind of talked sideways to me, didn't tell me the truth about everything. And 6 or 8 months after I was with them, he stopped me from selling my songbooks on the shows. Well, I was making more off the songbooks than was a salary,
Yeah.
So I kind of bided my time and looked around, and Farm and Fun Time in Bristol started up. They were a 10,000 watt station, and they had 2 hours at noontime called Farm and Fun Time. And I was one of the original groups that started it, and the Stanley Brothers were there. Curly King, a local guy, a Bristol guy, who sang like Eddie Arnold. So that was Farm and Fun Time. I worked there 47. And again, because of the mountain roads and stuff, I closed down in the late fall, went back to Waynesboro, sold produce during the winter to make a living. And In the meantime, Flatt Scruggs and Cedric Rainwater had all left Monroe in the spring, and they called me and wanted me to join them. And they were over in Hickory, North Carolina, where Jim Shoemate, a former fiddler with Monroe, worked at a furniture store, and he had 3 small girls. He didn't want to give up his day job till he was sure that Foggy Mountain Boy was going to fly,
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I joined them, and that little old 500-watt station didn't get off the roof of the buildings, I don't think. We was going to play into $20 grosses. And I told them, I said, boys, this ain't gonna buy lunch. And I made arrangements and got them on Farm and Fun Time. I did all the booking, and we worked on Split, and we just really did real well there. Played a lot of dates. I booked 3 or 4 dates the first week was there, And I worked there that year, and then went on down to Atlanta, worked on WSB with Bill Carlisle and Cotton Carrier and Sunshine Boys. And in the meantime, while I was with Flatt Scruggs in Bristol, Bill Monroe had come through to play the local theater, and he came over on our live show to plug his theater date. And right on the air, he said, if you ever want a job on the Opry, call me. Well, that ticked Lester off pretty good. But,
Yeah.
When the barn dance closed in Atlanta, I called Bill, asked him if that offer was still good. And he said, meet me in Huntsville, Alabama, Friday night. Easter weekend. So I came on in here and worked about a year with Bill and recorded his last session on Columbia with him. Can't You Hear Me Calling and Traveler's Lonesome Road. That was 1949.
All right. Yeah.
And then I reorganized and went to Bristol and from there to Louisiana Hayride, and that's where I started recording for Dot Records. They were just a small label, and the independent labels were just getting started then. I think their biggest distributor was the backseat of their car. But I had tried all the major labels. They turned me down. I couldn't get on RCA or Columbia, Capitol, Mercury. I did the first session with Flatt Scruggs on Mercury in the fall of 48, fall of 48. Flatt and I sang We'll Meet Again, Sweetheart. Flatt had written that, and I sang tenor in 2 quartets. I was singing tenor with Flatt and doing my solos and such as that. And they still get a lot of play on Facebook. So the early part of my hopscotching around, and then I was very successful with Dot Records. That was recorded first on my birthday in May of 1951. And it was uncustomary to not release in the summertime back then. Record companies seemed to think that people were on vacation and weren't listening in a concentrated manner to the radio stations. But they released it right after Labor Day in 51, and the very first record was a very successful record, a song I'd used for a theme song a long time, Sweet to Be Remembered. And so I was Raleigh, North Carolina from Shreveport, and that, if that was a cow, they'd be the back end of it. That was the worst job I ever had in Raleigh, North Carolina for a while, just a few months. And I went over to Mount Airy and just being the guitar, did winter over there, just selling PIs, and got a percentage of everything I sold, and I did well all winter just being the guitar. And went to Roanoke in the spring, and then back to Knoxville. And then Johnny's Used Cars in Baltimore hired me to do a early morning radio show from his car lot right on Route 40 up there. And that was extremely good for me. I got to play in the parks in Pennsylvania, and the records were doing well. And had a lot of Southern people up there working the shipyards. And so we did well. And in the meantime, Richmond, the WRVA Old Dominion Barn Dance called in the spring of 52, I guess it was. Maybe it was spring 50. I don't know. I was still doing that radio program the day that Hank Williams died. But I remember I showed up at 7 o'clock to do the radio show, and they announced that Hank had been found dead in his car the night before on his way to Ohio. But I went down to Richmond, worked at Old Dominion Barn Dad's for about 4 years, and then television became so big it was hard to get people out with just a single act. We used to go out with 4 or 5 people and play schools and things like that and do well. We'd do an hour and a half show or something. But the TV, you couldn't get them out of the house on Monday night because Lucy was on, you know. I was very fortunate, though I had the banjo in it, but the terminology of bluegrass wasn't prominent back then. It was just old-time mountain music. But I did the packet. My shows were as popular in California or more so than all the Opry acts because the Opry didn't go into California. But I had DJs out there was riding my records, and I played with Bob Wills and Hank Snow and Lefty Frizzell, Ray Price, Tubb, and Maddox Brothers and Rose. And my records were doing so well in California that we was working 7 nights a week. But Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the whole package would be together. But the first 4 days of the week, the promoter would put me off in smaller towns by myself, working clubs and things like that, you know. Because, like I said, because of the success of the records, we drew crowds in there, see?
Yeah.
After I was in Richmond, I just got burned out working so many one-nighters a year. And in 57, I disbanded and I just laid low, did a radio show once a week, a disc jockey show for a local, competitive station. A car dealer was sponsoring it, a Ford Motor Company. And it did pretty good there. They gave me 2 56 Ford Fairlanes with the police motor in them. There was 2 Ford Fairlanes sitting in my driveway, blue and white. They looked pretty sharp. And in the meantime, Dot Records called me from California. They'd moved from Gallatin, Tennessee here to California, and they called and asked me to come out there and build them a country and western department. So I went out there, and again, it was a tough time to get records going because the top 40 stations had come into play. And it wasn't discretion by any means, but the young guys who programmed the records for the top 40 stations were usually guys who had flunked out in the radio stations. So they were in charge of picking those top 40 records, and again, I don't think they was discriminating against us, but they didn't know what they was playing with, you know. I was fortunate because I still got a lot of country airplay,
Right.
because of the standard songs I did, Love Letters to Sand, Jimmy Brown, and stuff like that. So, and then that's been kind of the procedure. I had the understanding when I went to California in 57 that I'd only be out there 2 years, then I'd come back and have a office up at Gallatin where Dot Records originated, because most of my recording and production was done here in Nashville. At that time, there's quite a few studios. So that was the plan, and that's what I did, and I stayed with them, about 63 or something like that. And I was just having so much difficulty with picking up masters that were breaking out, and I had the liberty of recording and releasing anybody I wanted, but that's where it stopped because of the shortage of airplay, you know. But I had Leroy Van Dyke, Jimmy Newman, Reno Smiley, Tommy Jackson, and a number of other artists. Just missed Bill Anderson by a week or two. He had that Crying Time. No, what was that first thing he had? City Lights. And I was in California, and I always kept checking with station. If it broke out as many as 3 markets, we'd try to lease it. And that meant it had the potential of being a hit, see.
Right.
And so I called him from Hollywood, and he was on the radio station down in Commerce, Georgia. And he got off the air, and went up on the rooftop and talked to me. And he had just leased it to Tanner Records in Texas, so I missed that by a week or two, you see. But at the same time I was producing for Dot, I was in charge of distributor relations for the entire United States. We were with independent distributors. We didn't have our individual one like the major companies, RCA Capital. They had their own distribution set up. But the independent distributor, with so many little labels, they'd have as high as 80 or 90 labels on there in their office. They'd only go on the cream of the crop of each label. The rest sit there and gather dust till time to return, you know. And they'd ship them back unopened. But I'd drop in Chicago or New York or Baltimore or Richmond and unannounced and ask to see their inventory, and they'd have to show it to me. And a lot of them had the box broken on them. They just let them sit there. They just taking the also rans to get the leaders. You see what I mean? So I got acquainted with a lot of people like that.
Sure.
Business people, I mean, by going into those towns, because believe me, Dot was hot enough that they wanted to wine and dine me a lot to be sure I turned in a good report on them, you know. So Dot wouldn't take the line away from them. That was a pattern. It was a tough life trying to get the new artists that I would sign. I recorded Lou Burdett, the Braves pitcher, the year he won the 3 World Series games.
Wow.
They were the Milwaukee Braves yet at that time, and played the World Series with the Yankees in New York. And I was sitting in my office. I was a big, very avid baseball fan, and I thought, well, if he wins that 3rd game, there's going to be some kind of publicity about that. And I didn't know whether he could sing or not, but I knew he was from West Virginia, so I felt he could carry a tune a little bit, you know. So I was on the phone the minute he won that 3rd game, and couldn't get to him there with the parties and the stuff going on. But that night, the manager of the ball team called me from Milwaukee, wanted to know what I wanted. That's how hot Dot was at the time.
Yeah.
And I told him, so I recorded Lou Burdett, the old Cowboy Copa song, 3 Strikes and You're Out. And on the backside, his wife's name was Mary Lou, so I recorded Mary Lou on the back of it. Didn't get it out till late that fall, so it wasn't a smash hit because the ball teams were dormant, you know.
Yeah.
But every time after they moved to California, where the Braves out there, every time they came to town to play, Warren Spahn and Lou would come to my office and visit with me. And later, when Burdett retired in Florida, every time I'd play down there within 100 miles of him, he'd come to visit with me, you know. But sweet to be remembered, to give you some idea how strong it was, I had 4 covers on that song. And me on just the little label, but I still had the hit. Copas recorded for King, Flatt Scruggs did it on Columbia, Skinner did it on Capitol, and some pop artist did it on another label. I can't remember what that was. But I was fortunate with a small label to break out. But what Randy did, he bought a half hour on WSM every Friday night, Randy's record shop, and played the water out of my records, man. That was the reason he had them. And of course, a lot of local disc jockeys in the smaller towns would listen to see what was being played in Nashville, and then they in turn would play it, you see. But it was 78s back then, and a lot of them got broken shipping. But Randy was a heck of a hustler. He would didn't send just one record to a radio station. If they had 5 jockeys, he sent each jockey a record, because they picked their own material and played it at their discretion, you know. It kind of built along, you see. And I was one of the founders of the Country Music Association. I'm the only living member of the original board. And I was the first secretary and treasurer. Was on the board a lot of times. And also started the IBMA, the International Bluegrass. I was on the original board of that. It was a penny ante game. We had to take money out of our own pockets to pay the postage when we'd have board meetings. And we came up with a plan of going to the major markets like Houston and Atlanta, Chicago, New York, and putting on seminars, so to speak, for the people. William Marsh, for instance, was selling the heck out of Jim Reeves and Don Gibson and people, but they didn't know they were country. They were just hot artists. And
Right.
so we brought it to the attention that they was playing. I got a Tennessee walking horse and gave it away for a door prize in New York City. Oh boy, up there won it and didn't have any place to house it, so he sold it right away. So it was an active time, and played Carnegie Hall a couple of times, and all the folk festivals, Newport Folk Festival, Philadelphia, the Mariposa in Toronto, and played all the Six Flags entertainment places, Dallas, Atlanta, Cincinnati. I was very fortunate to be associated with prestigious venues and stuff like that. Played a lot of colleges. I was the first guy to start the college craze for country artists. I sat down at my little old home office and sent every college radio station 2 of my LPs. Told them if they could play them, I'd send them some more. And got a tremendous reaction because they weren't getting free records, you see. So that opened the door for a lot of colleges. I played a lot of the listening rooms like Vanderbilt and 3 or 4 times before got into many of the colleges. But because the listening rooms were successful, they started booking us. Lester Flatt and I played a lot of colleges together. And I played a lot of them by myself. So it was a broad spectrum. And our policy with Dot, when we was recording, especially in the early 50s, if we didn't have strong new material, we dropped back and do old pop hits. And I had a number of hits with those, like "The Waltz You Saved for Me" and "Drifting Back to Dreamland" and things of that nature. "Love Letter to Sand," of course, was a big old pop hit. And another policy that Dot had that was a tremendous growth thing was they released one of my singles every 6 weeks. Didn't make a bit of difference what the one ahead of it was doing. They released another one, and they didn't stop the one ahead of it. For instance, I was in Dayton, Ohio, played an afternoon and a night concert, and between shows I walked across the street to a little shotgun diner where you had a row of stools and a counter, to get a pack of cigarettes. And they had the older jukeboxes, so while I was going to have a coffee too, and I walked back, looked at that jukebox. I had 16 sides on that jukebox. 16 sides of my records are on there. And they were all getting airplay, or they wouldn't have left them on there.
Right.
That was the policy. If it doesn't play, we'd take them off. But I was enjoying that kind of success, and at the same time creating a following that would last a long time. You see, the longevity was really been great for me. I was in the business professionally and for better than 70 years. That's a pretty good start, I think.
It is, and you just released a record. Was it last year or the year before that? Songs from My Mother's Hand.
Yeah, on Wrinkle Records. Yeah,
on Wrinkle Records.
Tom Utes and Peter Cooper were very instrumental in helping me do that. And Sierra Hall was on it.
She was on it.
Yes, sir. And I think maybe you hit the lick or two.
I might have scratched out a note or two on it, but
I was very proud of that record because it was just what the title indicated. My mom used to sit by the radio in the wintertime. We just ran a little old farm of 65 acres or so, and we raised everything we ate. except coffee and sugar. And we traded eggs at the local grocery store for that. And so in the summertime, my dad would try to get a day's work here and there to get a little cash flow. And my mom and I ran that farm. I mean, had a couple of horses and 3 cows, I believe, and some hogs and chickens. And so we raised the wheat crops, the corn crops, the gardens for her canning and preservation. And but in the wintertime, she'd sit in front of that radio, quilting or crocheting or whatever, because it was too cold to work outside. And a lot of live radio back in those days, very little disc jockey business, because nobody serviced the stations with records. But they'd come on with a live show, and she'd get that composition book down, write a verse and a chorus or whatever she could remember, lay it back up there. A few days later, they'd sing the same song again. She'd get a little more. I've got 13 of those composition books in her handwriting that are a treasure, a real treasure for me. And Peter and Tom were broad-minded enough to recognize the potential of it, so it was just a real pleasure to do that, because a few of those songs had never been recorded. And the others were vintage songs from the 20s and 30s and back then that were no longer available or sung by anyone, see. I've recorded over 800 songs in my career, and got a couple more I want to do if I can make a grade.
You've been co-writing some, hadn't you, with Tom and Peter?
Yeah, we did. Tom and Peter and I did 10 songs. And actually it wound up being, I don't think anybody else has come up with this concept, my life story in song. We just sit here in my living room, and I talk about working in the mines and plowing corn or whatever I did or actually did, or horse running off and butchering and all that stuff, Just kind of painted a word picture, and they put it in song, So it's a slice of life. We're going to do an audio book of my latest book, and found so many pictures. I'm thinking about putting out a book of pictures with captions on them. I can tell my life story in pictures, I've got a lot of things on my plate if it's the good Lord's willing. I want to do a cookbook. I have my mom's old cookbook. She gave me that a number of years before she passed. And a lot of them are in her handwriting, and some of them are in books that she'd taken them out of. And I could make an interesting book out of that cookbook with the old recipes: corn pudding, fried scrapple. We called it pond horse. That's what they called it back then, but it's what the Dutchman called scrapple. What it was just a broth from where you cook the liver, the heart, the kidneys and neck bones and stuff in the big iron kettle, and then you stirred cornmeal into that broth to thicken it up, and put it in gallon crocks. In the wintertime, you'd slice that out and fry it. Make your tongue beat your brains out. But everybody needs to get that book, All the News Fit to Print. It's a 362-page book with 214 pictures and a complete discography in the back. Charlie Daniels wrote the forward. So
what was it like to know A.P. Carter?
Oh, well, when I was on Bristol the first time at 47, Mr. A.P. Still lived over at Holston Valley, where he was raised and his family lived. He had a store. And he was quite elderly, but he would drive that on mud roads, dirt roads, the ruts and all that stuff in all kind of weather. And would drive from Holston Valley over to Bristol every day, 5 days a week, and do a 5-minute radio show. He'd sing a song, and he sold little pocket testaments. That was the revenue he got for it. And he'd settle those. He'd do a song and sell that little testament and do whatever time would allow on another song, you see. Well, their records had been so fascinating to me that there was 1,000 things I would like to have asked him, but I didn't want to push my luck because I was afraid he'd run me off, you know.
Yeah.
But he was very congenial and talked a lot. He was a very solemn, inverted type person, but very knowledgeable. We would sit in the studios of that old radio station in Bristol, and I'd pick his head as much as I could, like I say, without annoying him, you know. Then I had the pleasure of working later with Maybelle and the girls. And, Maybelle recorded some records with me, sang harmony on some of them, you know.
You were on some of the package shows with Hank Williams, weren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Hank earlier.
Yeah, I forgot that when I was... But there was a promoter here, Les Hutchins, that would book us out 2 or 3 days, 7 days a week. And rather than have us... We was all traveling in cars, and it was all 2-lane roads, which wouldn't accommodate a bus. So he would charter a trailway bus and put the whole package on that bus. No bunks, but just sitting up, what sleep you got. Yeah. And we played from Minneapolis, Minnesota to Lake Charles, Louisiana, just one after another, you know. And Hank Williams was on that package, Jimmy Dickens and his band, Lonzo and Oscar. Monroe and his band, of which I was part of. So that was a bus full of side men and stuff, you know. And some of the boys had a little libation as we went along, but they'd offered it to Hank, and he never touched it. He knew if he had a couple, he was off and running, you know.
Yeah.
I never saw Hank Williams take a drink. Never did. He came back to Shreveport while I was there because he got a little raunchy. They fired him here at the Opry, and we spent more time together there than we did each actually on those package shows. One little interesting thing, it was just practiced and ethical that we didn't do each other's songs when we was on the same package show together. Well, I had learned 6 More Miles from Molly O'Day, which Hank had written and recorded with her in 46, and it was one of my featured songs in my concert. So I was on the stage in Minneapolis, and without thinking, being a Hank Williams song, I sang that. When I walked off, he was standing in the wing getting ready to come on. And I thought, oh, God, it's hit the fan here, you know. He said a most interesting thing to me. He said, well, I'll never sing that DG song again. Give me his approval, and I'll never forget that. But both these true stories are important to me. I was playing Branson, Missouri in the early 90s at the Willie Nelson Theater, and Grady Martin was working with Willie. And when Willie had to be out of town, Merle Haggard was there and worked Willie's theater. And I had a morning show. I had the first morning show in Branson. And I came down to watch Willie's show one night. Was dead at a motel right within walking distance of the theater. And Grady Martin was sitting out in his pickup truck getting ready to go on after a bit. It was summertime and had the door open. And he was sitting on the front seat with his feet out on the running board. And we were chatting because he'd done a lot of records with me. I mean, playing on my records. And right out of the blue, he said, you know, you're the best flat top picker in the business. Well, I was stunned. I couldn't answer that. The very next morning, Merle Haggard came by in his pickup truck, came by my motel, and asked me to go to breakfast with him. And after we ate breakfast, he said, ride out the house with me. I want you to meet my family. He had a new wife and a couple of toddling kids. And as soon as we got out there, well, we got our guitars out, and Merle rolled a little, hit me, and we sat there and picked and swapped back, and he looked over at me and said, if you ever want a guitar player on the road, call me. You're the best flat top picker in the world. 2 guys of that caliber in a matter of 12, 14 hours blew me away. So I busted buttons off my shirt, my chest sticking out.
Well, who were some of the most colorful characters, or just interesting people you ever got to play with on stage?
Oh, the woods was full of them.
Yeah.
Let's see, Leslie Keith, who wrote Black Mountain Rag. He was part Indian fellow.
Uh-huh.
And he was working with, he had worked back in West Virginia with the Bales brothers and Molly O'Day when she was back there and different ones. But he was one of the oldest guys drafted into service during the Second World War. Mm-hmm. He was 44 or 45 years old when they drafted him. Well, when he came back, he was working in Lee Morris Band at the same time I was in early 46. And we became great friends. As a matter of fact, he's the one who got me the job with Molly and also on the Bristol station. Recommended me to those people, you see. But he was a character. He very droll. He wasn't a bad man by any means, but he was very individualistic. And but there were some of those fellows that were. Did you ever hear of Blue Melhorn? That was his really name. It was Melhorn Brothers. Both fabulous fiddle players. Well, the one they called Blue, he just stayed drunk and drank all the time. He couldn't keep a job because he wouldn't show up. But one night in Marion, Virginia, the town was asleep and quieted down, and somebody heard a fiddle playing. They walked down the street, and there was Blue playing into a parking meter as a microphone. Hey, God, I'm telling you.
Way earlier, you'd mentioned playing in England and Germany. Where all did you play internationally?
Well, I was fortunate enough to play a lot of venues over there. I went over on one tour, big package show. We played 10 different countries that one tour. But it was a huge show. Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Brenda Lee, Tammy Wynette, George Jones, mm-hmm. Melvin Montgomery. I believe Jim and Jesse were on it. But they had a little rock band backing me, which was really very good, and they did a good job with me, But it wasn't a country band per se at all. But I encored 5 times in Paris. We played there 2 nights. I got pictures standing down at the Eiffel Tower. Uh-huh. But I'd go over and do 6-8 days myself in the Netherlands and Denmark and Sweden. And
did you have a favorite country that you got to visit playing?
Yeah, Switzerland was by far my favorite spot, and I had the pleasure of being there 3 or 4 times. But so many things there reminded me of things that I'd been associated with my childhood, like the old farm equipment and the bell cows. Whether you know what that is or not, but when they moved their herds of cattle, they had a strap around the cow's neck with a bell on it. And that was called the bell cow, and she walked in front, and the rest of the cows all followed. Mm-hmm. Well, that was very familiar up in Virginia because they'd drive them from the valley, Shenandoah Valley, up to the mountains to graze in the summertime. Mm-hmm. And they had those bell cows there, see. Mm-hmm. And they'd drive them back just like a west drive to Omaha or somewhere like that. Wasn't near as big by any means, but it'd be several hundred sometimes. And another thing back there that was very interesting, the farmers drove turkeys up the road to market, just like they would cattle. Honest to God.
Yeah.
They'd come down and take up the whole road. Any traffic had to pull off the road because they'd come up that blacktop road from down in the country, bring them into Waynesboro to sell for the shops.
What was it like working with Monroe?
I enjoyed it very much for several reasons. I say this in all sincerity, but yet I want to clarify it. I was never the biggest fan of Monroe. I never really liked that falsetto he did, and I never particularly liked his singing. I mean, the way he phrased and stuff like that, and quite nasal with a lot of it. But he's absolutely one of the best mandolin players I ever worked with. Had the best timing. And he and I were good friends. We never had a cross word. I handled the box for him, the selling tickets and checking up and everything, and all the business of it, because he wouldn't fool with it at all. You know? Scruggs did it when he was with him, and then I came in, I inherited it. And sometimes he wouldn't go out with us for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. Him and that gal he was running with would have fights, and she'd leave, and he'd go hunting for her. And I'd come in on weekends, and he'd come by my house trailer and said, "How'd you do?" And I'd take the box out, the ticket sales to show him. He said, "I don't care about that. How much money you got?" And he'd just take it and stuff it down in his pocket. Never counted or nothing, which was flattering to me that he didn't make me show all the figures and everything, which I was honest with it. I never took any money off of it. But we took out a ball team. Usually the Vanderbilt ball players that were off in the summertime. And we had a devil of a good ball team. We played ball teams down in Texas and up in Kentucky and Georgia and Alabama. And won a lot of games. But later on, I started to tell you, when I went to Bristol after I left Monroe here at the Opry, a lot of the schools had been renovated over on the Virginia side, and they wouldn't let us put country shows on in their auditoriums. They was afraid that folding chairs and the people would scar up their new floors. So I got the wild idea, and I put a basketball team together and played all those high schools with their local basketball team. I just had 5 guys traveling in one car, and then being my band's in the other one. If one fouled out, we had to play with 4. But we got a lot of the schools that we wouldn't have gotten in before. You came in. We used to work Florida with Monroe on a Friday, come in and play the Opry, drive back to Florida for Sunday. But he had tremendous crowds, and everybody on the Opry was there. And we played those parks in Pennsylvania. You had to drive yourself to death up 2-lane roads to get from Nashville to West Grove, Pennsylvania, or on up further near Reading and around through there. But that's what the rules were. And in fact, Connie B. Gay and Jim Denny promoted a lot of package shows in the Washington area. Connie was with the radio station there. And he had Jimmy Dean, and Jimmy was hot as a pistol. But Denny wouldn't take him for a guest shot on the Opry. He had a number 1. Came up through that depression, of course, you know. A little church, I got the picture on the wall there. I was baptized in the local river. They didn't have a pool and stuff like that. I was baptized in South River. My folks are buried in a little cemetery. I have a lot there, but I doubt if I'll fill it. Stay closer home. Everybody's gone up there now. They wouldn't know where to look for me. And at that time, I wouldn't care. The old saying is, you used to take your money with you because you couldn't spend it where you're going, and your arm be too stiff to reach in your pocket and get it. Yeah, Lord.
That's great.
I'm so fortunate to have a good recall, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can think when I was 4 years old.
What's the craziest travel day you had? You know, just trying to get from one
town
place to the other, yeah.
Well, I've got one that I think was a record setter. I played in Tampa, Florida on a Friday night. Drove into Richmond, played the Old Dominion Barn Dance, 2 shows. Got in the car and drove to Bismarck, North Dakota, 1,750 miles, for a Monday night performance. And we played throughout North and South Dakota 4 days, and went down to Columbia, Missouri, and played the college on another Friday night. and drove 1,000 miles from Friday night to Saturday night back to Richmond to do the barn dance. So in that 28 days, I drove 10,000 miles and worked 66 performances. And the reason the performances are so high that Slim Whitman and I worked 5 shows a day at a theater in Toronto, right down on the lake.
Yeah.
And then after that, we went out in the Midwest, Montana and Idaho, and every other day was in Alberta or some of those provinces out there. You know?
Well, all that was that by car? Just in a car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were all driving in cars. Yeah.
How did you?
That was in 1956.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get any sleep some of those times?
We didn't much.
Yeah.
And I drove that last 1,000 miles by myself. The guys I had weren't that good of drivers, and we didn't have time to stop for an eat stop. I'd stop to gas up, and they'd get Cokes and snacks like crackers or whatever. That's all we had to eat. If we'd stopped for one eat stop, we wouldn't have made the barn dance. Got there about 30 minutes before time to go on the air. Yeah. It sounds like a made-up story, but I can prove it. I got the contracts and stuff to prove it. Because in Canada at that time, you couldn't do shows on Sunday. So we went down to Niagara Falls with Ramblin' Lou and did an afternoon and night show Sunday. Drove back to Toronto and did a midnight show at the theater, because it was Monday then. Another little tidbit I think is interesting. When I was in Shreveport in 51, Slim Whitman was there doing a hayride and was carrying the mail during the week to make his living. I had a 5 o'clock show in the morning. It ran 30 minutes. Lots of time would be in Florida and get back just in time to I'd go into bed a minute to do that 5 o'clock show. And Webb Pierce was working at Sears Roebuck as a salesman, and he played the barn dance, and he and I had a 30-minute show at 8 o'clock in the morning. Johnny and Jack were there. Shot Jackson was with them, Paul Warren. Kitty wasn't working much then because the kids were small and she was raising them. But Johnny and Jack. Well, that was 4 of us. Me, Webb, Slim, and Johnny and Jack. And we were all, just picking with the chickens, as you heard. Barely enough to get by. And within a year, all 4 of us had a hit record. Webb had Wandering, Slim had Indian Love Call, Johnny and Jack had Poison Love, and I had Sweet to Be Remembered. It happened, all 4 of those hits happened within a matter of 6 or 8 months. We go for nights. Lots of times when I was carrying a band, I'd check into a motel just for us to take showers and change clothes. I've shaved in a mountain stream.
Yeah.
Honest to God, cold water. And those are hardship cases, you know. But you were determined, was competitive. You just did what you had to do to survive. Quite often you weren't doing a whole lot of that, you know. If it hadn't been for Shot Jackson, I couldn't have stayed in Shreveport. He was a good shade tree mechanic, lived out in a trailer park. I had a house or an apartment or something. But I could afford to buy the parts. I had an old 49 Chevrolet with over 100,000 miles on it. It had sleeves putting the pistons so much it going up and down like like a fan, you know. But I'd buy the parts, and Shot would do the maintenance work under shade tree out in the trailer park. If I'd had to went to a regular dealer to have that maintenance done, I couldn't have stayed. Stanley Brothers' dad he wasn't a musician, but he was a pretty good businessman, and he was promoting them and booking shows, and he was doing a lot of booking for me. I didn't know the territory at all, and they were from that part of the country, Southwest Virginia. But the old man got to where he was giving me the shavings and them the prestige dates.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't stand still for that. So after that, it was a little competitive.
Yeah.
Carter and I got along quite well. Ralph was too sneaky. I never could trust his butt. He still is. For instance, the way I finally decided to get the old man out of my hair, I didn't know that country back in Southwest Virginia and Eastern Kentucky and the mountains and the roads. And a lot of it was dirt, gravel roads, and the hard surface roads were like a snake, you know. And I'd ask them how to get back to some date in Grundy, Virginia or something, and they'd be very helpful. Send me up such and such a road. It'd be an old wagon road with trees down across the damn road. We'd have to get out and chop that tree to get on up there, and then be forever getting there, you know. Missed a few dates, honest. So I never particularly liked that.